freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Welcome back, everyone, to Patriot Coalition Live. I'm Matthew Nugent.
And I'm Jason Mrochek.
Thanks for joining us today, everyone. Our goal is to create a timeless resource to teach about the U.S. Constitution, the proper rule of government, the importance of America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and how to defend against threats to our republic. Please send us your questions and comments to freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. That's freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. We would love to hear from you. Please send us a line. And we have some great news. We now have sponsors. Now, remember that whenever we spend our time, attention, and dollars with what we call the three-headed beast of mainstream media, big tech, and big business, places like Amazon, we empower them to exert tyranny against us. However, when you buy from free speech businesses like shopping at patriotcoalitionlive.com with our sponsors, you empower businesses who love free speech, businesses who won't cancel you, censor you, or call you a terrorist. Now, we don't have everything you need, but we have something for everyone. And every time you shop in conservative economy communities, trademark, like patriotcoalitionlive.com, you are using economic tools to win the fight for liberty. Please visit and shop at our sponsors at patriotcoalitionlive.com. Thanks, guys. Okay, y'all ready?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do this. Okay, the title of today's episode is, Do You Call Yourself a Conservative? Now, we're going to approach this from a nonpartisan perspective because conservatism is not about partisanship or basically a political party as much as it is about principles and values. Now, millions of Americans do not know what conservative or conservatism really means. And there are a few reasons. Because the American left-leaning education calls conservatives racist, and some of them are conflating conservatives with terrorists. Mainstream media does this, especially if you're a Trump supporter, identify with Trump's values. And even some Republicans conflate being a conservative with being a Republican, which are not necessarily the same. This is like saying, I'm a Republican, therefore I am a conservative. Not necessarily so. Okay,
yeah, that's right.
That begs the question. So what does it mean to be a Republican? And a lot of people don't know this. Jason's been doing this for 17 years as the executive director of a conservative organization, political organization. So, and I learned from Jason, thanks for that, what Republican or what the Republican Party represents is decided every 2 years at the Republican National Convention, Jason?
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the last convention, there were 2,550 delegates, and they basically vote on what the platform is. So obviously, every 2 years, it's going to change. So the definition of conservatism does not change. Now, someone might try to change it or skew it, right, but it doesn't. Yeah. But the Republican platform changes literally every 2 years. Okay. So, and it sets the priorities of what the Republican Party is going to do for the following 2 years. Now, let's take a look at the definition of conservative from Webster's 1828 dictionary. You guys have heard me say, you go to websters.com and it's a chalkboard. Usually you think of dictionaries as something as hard and safe and secure. Maybe hard and steadfast, meaning it's not going to change. But on the internet, it's like a chalkboard. You write it, and a few days later, you can rub it off, and you can make a new definition, which is exactly what goes on today.
Yep,
okay,
that's exactly right.
So the 1828 dictionary says this, quote, conservative is this: having power to preserve in a safe or entire state or from loss, waste or injury, unquote. And in the context of politics, what is it we are preserving? Okay. What we are preserving in the context of politics is those principles and values upon which our country was founded. It's important. I'm going to repeat it again.
Yeah.
In the context of politics, conservatism is preserving those principles and values upon which our country was founded. Now, okay, Jason,
That's our stake in the ground, and saying that's us saying this is what it means to be conservative.
you got it. Now, Jason and I have been patriots our whole life. Both of us, as you know, graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York, back many days ago.
A few.
Yes, we are what you call old grads. Okay, he was an infantry officer. I was a combat engineer, airborne ranger, all that fun stuff. Now in the last 17 years, as I mentioned, Jason has been, specializing in this and is an expert. So that said, we have a lot of insight here, and you can trust Jason for many reasons, and he actually inspired me to participate in this podcast. So it is also to note that our nation, America, is exceptional. Okay, here's some examples, and there are thousands. Okay, here are just a few. We've secured more prosperity and more liberty for more people than anywhere else in the world. The American ideals and values, when applied by other countries in the past. Notice I said in the past because you can move these away. But here are examples of countries that had similar results: Japan, Germany, England, South Korea. Note, like I said, when you stray away from conservative ideals and values, prosperity and liberty fade away. The same has been happening in the United States. And we only need to look at what Western Europe countries are going through. What is it, $5.50 for a gallon of gas, I think, in Europe, maybe more. It's terrible. So if we continue on that path, the same thing will apply. Now,
and Matt, so essentially what you're going through right now is the reasons why we ought to conserve. Why we ought to be conservative. We're conserving, what it is that we were founded upon, and the prosperity that it brings, right?
Absolutely. Now, the United States only counts for 4% of the world population, but we make up more than 90% of the inventions, new medicines, and win more Nobel Peace Prizes than all of the other nations combined. Now, we invented the telephone, the cell phone, the internet, made the Panama Canal, and joined the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. We were the first in flight. We put a man on the moon. So these are just an example of what makes America exceptional. People are literally dying to come to America. Okay. We are the most generous nation in the world and give the most foreign aid and comfort to those in need, both inside and outside the United States.
Right. And so what you have just done is you've given us the reasons that why we should be conserving those values and principles upon which we were founded. So what is it that those, what were the values and principles that our founders espoused? And so that is what I'm going to talk a little bit about right now. And so what is it we want to conserve? Well, it starts with the values, the principles of liberty that were espoused in the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. So, and of course, it incorporates our Judeo-Christian heritage too. So if you've been with us on this podcast for some time, you know that we've talked about this in some length, episodes in the past. But the principles of liberty in the Declaration of Independence, they're espoused there in that second paragraph. These are things like all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or the right to property. Another one is that the purpose of government is to protect those rights. Government derives their just powers from the consent of the governed. And if government fails to do all these things, if they fail to do them all well or sufficiently, it is the duty of the people to throw it off and start again. So all these principles of liberty that are espoused in that declaration are what we're conserving. We want to conserve these principles of liberty for all time. So it's really important. So what else are we trying to conserve as conservatives? Well, the document that codifies the protection of these liberties, which is the U.S. Constitution, right? And specifically in there, we want to preserve the Bill of Rights. These are where a lot of those protections come from. The right to free speech, the right, freedom of assembly, freedom to exercise your religion, the right to bear arms. All these are extremely critical. Protection from illegal search and seizure. The right to due process. We can't be deprived of due process. Life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. These are critical things that the Constitution it wraps its protective arms around. And so this is what else we have to conserve, right? The values and the principles, the values and principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
You bet. Now, so Jason talked about the principles of our founding fathers, and he talked a little bit of our values and our Judeo-Christian heritage. I'll shift a little bit more to talk about more in detail about the values of our founding fathers, which naturally brings us to our Judeo-Christian heritage. Now, the Bible is 66 books. I don't know how many pages. I guess it depends how many, whether you have a small Bible or
big print or small print, right?
Yeah, big print or small print, but it'll take you more than a couple hours to read. I'll put you that. So to encapsulate the Bible, our Judeo-Christian heritage, in just a paragraph or two is impossible, but
doesn't do it justice.
It doesn't. Okay. So for those of you who are maybe more learned than I in the Bible and in the scripture, give me some grace here. And we're just going to pull a few items, about 5 from the 10 commandments. So 5 of the 10 commandments. And this comes from Exodus chapter 20, verses 2 through 17, which is what Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, which is written in the first person. This is God speaking to the Israelites, okay? I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me, end quote. Honor thy father and mother. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't murder. Now, for those of you who might think, oh, these are obvious, guess where they came from, guys? They came from the Bible. And every single founding father and framer of the Constitution, okay, the Judeo-Christian heritage was a part of our founding, okay? If you go to previous episodes, there's extensive information about that, despite what the media say, despite what big businesses say, or business magnates, or what schools say.
Or public schools, yeah. I was just going to say.
Public schools, thank you. Yeah. So we use these values to make laws. Life is important. Freedom and liberty are important. Note in the first commandment, a lot of people don't know, but before the first commandment says, thou shalt have no other gods before me, God says, I am the Lord thy God, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage. I gave you liberty. I gave you freedom. Okay. And Jason and I have, taught many times on this, that life, liberty, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is God-given. Okay. Yeah. We help protect it, but it is God-given, not by a country or a man, because those countries and those leaders, they change. Okay.
That's I love the Thomas Jefferson quote. In fact, I had my wife make me a shirt. It says, the God that gave me life gave me liberty at the same time. It encapsulates it, right? I mean, the two go hand in hand with one another.
There you go. And that interpretation that I just gave of liberty being important, I got to give shout out to Dennis Prager. Hey, Dennis. He taught me that, before God said, thou shalt have no other gods before me, he said, hey, I was the one that gave you freedom and liberty. Okay. And yet more credence to the assertion and the statement of fact that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to those things, is God-given, not man-given.
Sure.
So some people say we can't use laws to force someone to follow a moral code, but our right or wrong legally comes from our right and wrong morally, which at our nation's founding comes from our Judeo-Christian heritage. And these are the values we want to conserve. Okay.
Yeah. Because it's crazy that some people say that, you're right, because you can't legislate morality, but that's precisely what we're doing. When we say you can't go and murder somebody, we're saying murder is wrong, if you do it, you're going to get punished. So these are ways that certain people who don't want to be held to a standard try to tell us that, look, I get to choose what's right and wrong for me, not anybody else. Well, that's not the way that our society is built, and we chose it that way.
That's right. So Jason and I bring this up because when you teach these principles and morals, people remember them and use these principles and morals to fight their sinful nature and grow to be mature. Okay. Quoting Dennis Prager, he says, we are all you look at a 2-year-old, they're going to hit another 2-year-old and take what they want, and until a parent teaches them, no, you don't do that. You should say please and thank you and share. And what's yours is yours, what's theirs is theirs. If you want to borrow it, you ask and you say please. Okay. Goodness in humans is mined, just like gold is mined, silver is mined, etc. Okay. These morals and principles need to be taught. Okay. The opposite, and Jason talked about it a second ago, if in the context of what Jason said, if you take away these principles and moral codes, what if we didn't have a law that said, there's no law that should say I shouldn't murder? People will say, hey, there's no law against it, so I'm going to do it. It's because it's in our nature to be sinful. Now, we also have a thinking brain, and we can say, hey, let's set up a rule, a code of morality that guides us to be our best. Yeah. And keeps us from falling to our sinful nature. Okay. Now, let's say, for example, if we don't teach these principles and morals and we get what we see today, here's some examples of what we're seeing today. Now, for those of you who are listening to this, our nation's morals are eroding. We're getting further away from our founding principles and our founding morals. And as a result, we're getting some of this. Our society thinks it's okay to walk down the street and sucker punch a 90-year-old man, record it, and post it on social media. Okay? People think it's okay to let a 17-year-old boy use the same locker room with girls. I mean, people call the murdering of their child in utero, okay, meaning abortion, and call it women's rights when half of those babies never get the right to be a woman. When someone doesn't agree with the political ideology, they can just walk down the street and loot stores. I mean, and a lot more. And that's just one example. Okay.
Yeah. It's, so the underpinning of our Judeo-Christian heritage is critical to those values and principles that we're trying to conserve. It's also important, because we've just talked about the importance of conserving the U.S. Constitution and the intent of the Constitution. Well, part of that is we have to conserve the original intent of that Constitution as well.
That's right.
Not just what anybody decides it means today, but the original intent. There's a couple of great quotes that some of our founders passed down to us that speak to this exactly. So the first one is from Thomas Jefferson. It says, on every question of construction of the Constitution, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted, recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or intended against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed. Again, that's Thomas Jefferson saying that. And he's essentially saying, don't twist the words to mean what you want them to mean.
Right.
Just follow the original intent. It's pretty clear. The Constitution was written for the average person to understand. There are a few terms of art in there that are easily researched to figure it out, but it's not something that you have to twist around to try to figure out what it means.
Yeah, and to that point, it's important we understand the intent because people can skew and misinterpret words, both intentionally and unintentionally.
Yeah,
so
it's
a guidepost, and nowadays it's intentional. We see it more intentional.
Yeah, and then James Madison also had another little bit more poignant one. He said, "Do not separate text from historical background. If you do, you will have perverted and subverted the Constitution, which can only end in a distorted, bastardized form of illegitimate government." So he doesn't mince words there. It's exactly what happens when people try to squeeze a meaning out of the text that is not intended.
And it's also important, as Jason, or I say Jason, as James Madison, you have to look at the historical context.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just important that you look at the time.
Yeah, it's critical, which is why on this podcast and various episodes, we'll give you the resources that you can go back and research. Hey, what were they actually debating in the Constitutional Convention when these phrases were introduced? What did they mean? It's pretty simple to go back and do that. It's not necessarily easy because it's long documents, but it's simple. I mean, if you want to know the answer, you can find it. So that kind of begs the question, okay, so an original intent, we have to conserve the original intent. What is the opposite of that? An originalist is somebody who believes and conforms to the original intent. The opposite, what is happening a lot these days, is what's called a living constitutionalist. And I guess it may sound attractive to some, but what it means is you're making the laws based on the whims of men. We're saying, what do I want that to mean? What's convenient to me? What's politically expedient to me? What will give me and allow me to maintain more power? And then that's what they just say that it means, and they'll twist the words. So the final piece that we have to consider when we look at conservatism and what we're conserving is, what is it that the oaths that every public official takes? Right? Because as we've talked about before, and we'll get into even more, every single public official in the United States has to take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. Well, if we have to take an oath to support and defend the Constitution, as an example, if we raise our right hand as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and we say we're supporting and defending the Constitution, what is it exactly that we're defending? Is it a piece of paper? Is it the words on that document, or is it the latest opinion rendered by a federal judge somewhere in Oklahoma or Massachusetts? Do we have to first check with the recent rulings of every court before we decide what the Constitution means? No, that would make it too burdensome for every public official to uphold their oath if they had to consult with an attorney or, a law book or a opinion from courts to figure out what it is that they took an oath to support. It doesn't make common sense, right? So what we're taking an oath to is timeless. It's not, whatever was decided on a Tuesday last week. It's not what the judges say. It's what the document says. So those are the things that we are trying to conserve. We're trying to conserve the principles and the values. If we were to summarize, everything that we've talked about today, we first started talking about, we asked you, do you call yourself a conservative? Well, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Maybe some of you, like some of us are like, well, what he calls a conservative is maybe not what he calls a conservative.
That's right.
So conservative is not what the media tells you when it tells you what it means. They won't do a good job of telling you because it's against their best interest, right? Conservative is also not synonymous with a political party. It has nothing to do with partisan politics and everything to do with values and principles. And Matt, he gave us the 1828 Webster's definition of the word conservative, which is having power to preserve in a safe or entire state or from loss, waste, or injury, right? So we're conserving something. And then we talked about what it is that we are actually preserving. Well, again, the values and principles upon which our nation was founded. So these are the liberty as espoused in the Declaration of Independence. It's the principles as written in and intended in by the framers in the Constitution in order to protect the liberties that are espoused in the Declaration. And it's all of these things that are woven, and woven throughout all of this is our Judeo-Christian heritage. It underpins all of them. So having gone through this exercise with us, we'll ask you again, do you call yourself a conservative? So if you value these conservative ideals, then the ideals and principles, they ought to be the yardstick by which you measure and decide who you vote for. right? Because the people that you vote for, they are going to have hopefully the same values and principles, and they're going to preserve and conserve all these reasons that Matt gave us as to what makes, America so special. So hopefully that's been instructive and helpful to everybody. We've enjoyed going through it. Great job today, Matt.
You too, brother. So thank you for joining us today, folks. Remember, please visit and shop at our sponsors at patriotcoalitionlive.com. Remember, we have an email address, freedom@patriotcoalitionlive.com. If you are not already a regular subscriber, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, places like iHeartRadio, Spotify, and where you normally get your podcast. Please give us a 5-star rating where you get your podcast. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you here next time.
Take care, guys.
Bye now.